In ancient Chinese medicine, there were 8 little-known herbs said to lead to long life and supernatural energy and youthful vigor. Let's look at 8 secret herbs of the ancient Chinese sages and learn the stories of how their miraculous powers were first discovered. In the authoritative book called Legendary Chinese Healing Herbs by Henry C. Liu, the real historical legends of how these super herbs of longevity and stellar health were first discovered back in the mists of ancient Chinese history are carefully preserved and explained. In order to best set the stage for our deep dive into ancient Chinese immortality herbs, let us imagine we are in ancient China. Imagine, if you will, we are in Qing Dynasty China. It is the age of the great emperors. Back then, despite their truly amazing wealth and the luxury they lived, most Chinese emperors lived a relatively short life, partly because of their involvement in hectic and somewhat warlike politics, and partly because of their excessive indulgence in, let us say, the services of their courtesans. With hundreds of wives to attend to, it wasn't long before all the life force of the average emperor, with the average energy levels, would be a spent force, and eventually lead to their premature deaths. Although possibly well worth it, it was this excessive activity which definitely took a toll, both physically and emotionally, and at least from the point of view of Chinese medicine, would completely drain their life force. However, an emperor named Qian Long of the Qing dynasty was recorded to have lived the longest life of all the Chinese emperors prior to his time. Emperor Qianlong was said to have frequently boasted about the secret methods he used to achieve longevity, and had called himself the Long Life Emperor. That Qianlong had managed to stay youthful and had lived a long life is a historical fact. The British ambassador to China at the time was said to have written something like this in his diary. When I met Emperor Qianlong, he was already at the age of 83, but he looked as if he was only 60 years old. He was in perfectly good health and surpassed young men in energy and spirits. Many Chinese physicians have attributed Qianlong's longevity to his regular consumption of many herbs, but most notably medicinal cornel fruit and morinda root. The fruit of the medicinal cornel looks like a date, tastes sour, and is found mostly in the mountains, which is why the Chinese call it sour mountain date. Now, for us, imagining ourselves now in Qing Dynasty China, this tale of the Long Life Emperor and his morinda fruit are well known. So, for the curious Qing Dynasty citizen, it might be tempting to visit one of the many esoteric herbalist shops which dotted the hidden streets and alleyways in China's ancient and mysterious towns. So, drawing near to one such shop now of traditional Chinese medicine, imagine that we dare to step inside. Strewn with jars of mysterious herbs, mushrooms, and bizarre esoteric and magical items, the smell of exotic and rare incense hangs in the air. Strange spirits seem to flit in the corners of your eye, flashing across the many mirrors that line the walls. Suddenly, a mysterious figure addresses you. The shopkeeper of this shadowy den of occultism asks, "What is it you seek?" Stammering in your fear, you manage to stutter out your quest for herbs of immortality and long life. After a long cold look from his glass eye, he presents you with an odd thorny stalk laden with seeds. This one, called Gao Jizi, he says. Let me tell you the legend that surrounds it, seeker of the ancient mysteries. There is a story about a Chinese traveler who, while passing through a village called Qihe, happened to witness a young lady beating an old man with gray hair all over his head. The young lady looked about 15 or 16 years old, and the man somewhere between 80 and 90. The traveler asked the young lady why was she beating the old man, and she explained that she was his granddaughter, and she was very angry with him for failing to take his longevity herbs. That was why he looked so old, she said. The traveler asked her age, and was told that she was 372 years old. Rather taken aback by that, he asked her how she had managed to live that long, and she replied that she consumed matrimony vine all year round. China's greatest herbalist, in fact, Shi Chen Li, who wrote the celebrated outline of Materia Medica, a book on ancient Chinese herbs published in 1578, pointed out in this book that the people in the village of Nanchui were in the habit of eating matrimony vine, and that a very high percentage of them lived a long life. And a famous Chinese poet in the Tang dynasty by the name of Yiqi Liu wrote a poem in praise of the wonderful effects of matrimony vine, which said that even the water from a well near the plant can make people live a long life. In fact, matrimony vine is not only good for longevity, but is often associated with beauty as well. For instance, a Chinese writer reported that he knew a beautiful woman from a wealthy family who had always made it a point to drink matrimony vine tea and eat the seeds every day, which was why he said she looked 20 years younger than her age. Thoroughly sold, and adding the thorny vine to your basket, your eyes are drawn to the statue beside the shopkeeper's desk, a Chinese dragon, whose eyes seem to glow with an eerie light. No, must just be your imagination. It's the eerie vibe in this place is all. So, what about the herb near this dragon statue, shopkeeper, you venture to ask? Raising an eyebrow, he begins to speak. Well-chosen seeker, he exclaims, for it is the Momordica fruit, one of the few fruits that cannot be eaten until it is dried by fire. Strange and mysterious in this way, it can only be found in the distant province of Guangxi in southern China. The people of this region have long called this fruit longevity fruit because they have believed that a prolonged consumption of it would make people live a long life. This fruit is said to resemble the stomach of a Buddha, which is why it is named the Arat fruit, since Arat refers to a Buddhist who has attained nirvana. Besides living for a good long time, it can also cure coughs, constipation, chronic laryngitis, hoarseness, and chronic bronchitis, and even cancer. The fruit contains an unknown substance, in addition, that makes it taste about 300 times sweeter than ordinary sugar. Although it tastes so sweet, the Chinese nevertheless believed, ironically, that it also cured diabetes. Nodding in knowing silence, you add yet another purchase to your basket, keen to get all the pleasures of turbo-powered sugar consumption while also preventing the beatus. With long life thrown in to boot. Your eyes now scan the room. And what about next to this cage holding the, right there, right beside it there, that mushroom? What's its story, good shopkeeper? Folding his hands and smiling, he says, "The spirits are guiding your eyes, seeker, for you've selected yet another famous medicine that grants near immortality, if used correctly. Hearken to the tale of the famous reishi mushroom. Once, a shrewd businessman had made himself rich by constructing and selling buildings. However, all his wealth couldn't buy him health. He was constantly skinny, sickly, and old beyond his years. One day, while building a large building, the workers dug out a strange object from the ground. With its thick and soft body, it almost looked like a huge human hand. Everyone was scared, but particularly the businessman. Could this be a bad omen for me? Would the building collapse after its completion, he worried. It was then that he decided that a fortune teller should be summoned to shed light on the situation. "This object signals a real disaster for you," said the fortune teller. "How can I prevent this disaster?" he said, his face turning pale. "I would do anything." After a long pause, the fortune teller said, Well, you could turn the upcoming disaster into good luck if you had the courage to eat that strange object. The businessman was initially shocked at this suggestion, but later agreed to it and ate the big fleshy object that night at dinner. It didn't taste as bad as he had thought it would. In fact, he somewhat enjoyed its taste. A few days later, he began to feel dramatic changes taking place in his body. His complexion had improved considerably. He had put on weight, his gray hair had returned to its original color, and he looked much younger than his age. And he really felt great. Later that week, a Taoist monk passed by the construction site where he was working. Spotting him, he stopped and said to him, "Sir, you look different from other people. Did anything extraordinary happen to you recently, perchance? Have you eaten anything unusual? Let me take your pulse." He sat down with the Taoist monk. After taking his pulse, the monk said, "Sir, did you possibly eat something that looks like a big human hand?" He admitted that he had and told the monk the whole story. The monk said, "Sir, the strange object that you ate is an herb called spiritual vegetable meat. And now that you've eaten it, you no longer belong to this mundane world. You ought to come with me to the temple on the mountain, where you can be a Taoist monk and enjoy immortality on earth." Taking his advice, he went with him to the temple, where he stayed forever. Impressed, you add purchase number 3 to your basket, eager to not only eliminate those few gray hairs you spotted just the other day around your temples, but also to get a little transcending of this mundane world action thrown in by virtue of a few kilos of reishi mushrooms. Great, you say. Well, shall we proceed to checkout? Do you take copper coins? Not responding right away, however, you notice the odd shopkeeper staring blankly across the hazy dark shop, looking at a mirror, in fact, which seems to emanate an evil energy. It seems to mesmerize you as you are drawn to it. Giving a low whistle, however, the strange little shopkeeper pipes up. "Oh, don't mind the mirror. It's just a portal into the dark dimension. The very dark dimension. Sometimes an evil spirit or two is liable to pop out from that dark web. Well, excuse me there, customer. I'll just toss a little of my patented ghost powder at that mirror, if you don't mind. There, shouldn't be a problem now. But direct your eyes to the herb just beneath the mirror, friend. That's what I really wanted to draw your attention to. Let me tell you a story about that herb." A notorious Chinese emperor of the Qin dynasty called himself the first emperor of China, meaning that after his death, his son would be the second emperor and his grandson the third, and so on, without interruption. Not only had the emperor built the Great Wall to head off possible foreign invasion from the north, but he had also kept over 3,000 concubines in his palace to satisfy his fantasies. But no sooner had the emperor died than his palace was burned down, and the empire he had built came to a total collapse. All the concubines either escaped or were sent away from the palace by the new conqueror, and one was later found, however, in the woods. You see, after this concubine had escaped from the palace, she had hid in the woods, where there was little to eat. After a while, she met an old man who advised her to eat Oriental Arbar Vitae seeds. Since they were not exactly pleasing to the taste, she hesitated at first, but finally came to realize that she had no choice. And so she began to eat them, gradually becoming used to their taste. As it turned out, she developed great strength in resisting the severe winter cold, as well as the extreme summer heat, as well as everything else. It wasn't until a century and a half later that a group of hunters found her in the woods. She was naked, but had long black hair, and was seen escaping as fast as a monkey. The hunters were very curious, of course, and ran after her in pursuit. Once they finally captured her, they questioned her and were shocked to find that the black-haired woman used to be a concubine of the first emperor of China, and that she was now 200 years old. Giving out a low whistle of your own now, you greedily scoop up a few handfuls of the Arbor Vitae seeds, liking the sound of a little deep woods parkour, especially at the ripe old age of 200. These keep getting better and better, these stories, you think to yourself. Not finished yet, however, the old shopkeeper points one bony finger towards an odd and esoteric device. Covered in mysterious symbols, it seems to draw you in. Oh, just a magical contraption to predict the future, friend. No cause for alarm, he croons reassuringly. As you approach the device and the machine seems to suddenly flash a warning of imminent danger, you notice another intriguing pile of pungent mystery herbs on the table. This is what I wanted to show you, Seeker. You see, in 812, a 56-year-old man by the name of He was pruning his trees when two plants a few meters apart suddenly caught his attention. He thought it was very strange that the vines of these plants were crossing each other, not unlike a man and a woman embracing each other in love. There's got to be a good reason for these plants to be doing this kind of thing, he thought. He then dug out the roots of the plants and brought them home to cook and eat them as food. He had been so weak since childhood that he had never married. However, after consuming the roots for 7 days, he began to have a desire for marriage. After consuming the roots for a few months, he began to feel much stronger, and after 1 year of consumption, his gray hair had all returned to black, and he began to look like a young man again. At that point, he got married and then fathered a baby boy. Both the father and the son lived to over 130 years of age. The Chinese have called the tuber of multi-flower knotweed He's black hair ever since. Raising a slightly graying eyebrow, you discreetly plop a few bundles of He's black hair into the basket, noting it's around the same price as your hair dye anyway. When, suddenly, out of nowhere, an ancient Chinese gnome, wearing occult Chinese symbols on his robes and carrying an arcane staff, emerges from the storeroom. "Oh, pardon me," he chimes up, "just stocking the shelves with this new shipment of Schisandra berries." Noting the shopkeeper's eyebrows raise once again, and the now familiar interlacing of his fingers, you know it's story time once again. Ah, timely entrance, for we're having a sale on this medicine just at the moment. Let me tell you a story about the amazing berry Schisandra. Once, a fellow suffered from tuberculosis and kept losing weight until he looked like a bamboo stick. The people in the small village where he lived wanted to get rid of him because they thought that tuberculosis was highly contagious, and they were right. One neighbor, in fact, had suggested that they put him on a boat to die in the high seas, and another had hinted that he should be burned to death or killed with a knife. Lovely. Upon hearing of these plots against their son, the parents of the patient became understandably worried and finally came up with an idea. "Son, your dad and I do love you very much, but we cannot help you in any way except to take you to the mountains where you can hide from the people in the village. If you're lucky and recover from this illness, you can return home. But if you die, well, we'll bury you just as soon as we know about it, all right?" Well, his mother was in tears, but I'm sure he was none too happy, as this fellow was taken up to the mountains and put in a cave to live out his final days on his own. He had managed to survive on the dried foods that his parents had brought him for a while, but when they were all used up, he didn't have the strength to look for any more. One day, he had become so weak that he was ready to give up the ghost. He was ready to just give up the struggle and die, and he started crying in his misery, quite loudly. Hearing these sobs, a hunter appeared at the entrance to the cave and asked him what was the matter. After the sick fellow explained his predicament, the hunter said, "Well, I'm just a hunter, not a doctor, so I'm afraid I cannot help you, but I can pick some fruit for you to eat." The fruit the hunter gave him lasted for 10 days. At that point, the fellow had gradually regained enough strength to start picking the same fruit by himself. In a few months, he had recovered from the tuberculosis and went home. When his parents saw him alive and well, at first they couldn't believe their eyes. Later, when they asked him how he had managed to recover, he told them all about the fruit. The whole village was in shock, and this fellow lived to be over 100 years old. One of the only herbal remedies known to have all 5 of the traditional flavors of Chinese healing medicine, it is thought to be a tonic that strengthens practically every substance in your body, leading to long life and good health. Shrugging in agreement, you think, why not? One more long life medicine, the more the merrier. Giving a thumbs up and sprinkling your entire penny jar of copper coins down on the counter, you proceed to check out your basket as the weird old shopkeeper and his sketchy little magic gnome smile widely. Armed as you are now with enough traditional old Chinese wonder herbs of health and longevity to live another 200 years, heck, easily 300, beaming now and ready for a long and leisurely lifetime in the many centuries to come, you tip your hat and head back out into the dark Qing Dynasty night. But the best part of our little story of make-believe tonight, friends, is that all these herbs are real herbs. All of these were real legends taken from the true documentation of medicines that in ancient China and according to the authentic traditional Chinese medicine were said to add decades or centuries to your life and strength to your body, to gird your life force, strengthen your chi, and keep you looking young and beautiful to boot. So whether you're after a little deep woods parkour superpowers, a 372-year-old marriage, or just all the sugar you can handle without getting the beatus, well now, friends, you can make all your dreams come true, for it is all real, and just probably all these herbs are available now online. With the exception of the ghost powder. That one was made up, I'm afraid, and not available online. But then, you could always try the dark web. The very dark web.
Well, that just about wraps up tonight's tale from Lorehound. Join us as we sniff out more of history's most interesting stories.
As the hound dog entered the dimly lit library, he sensed an aura of mystery surrounding the ancient scrolls. The dusty shelves towered above him as he sniffed his way through the labyrinth of books. Suddenly, he picked up a scent and followed it to a secluded corner. With bated breath, he approached the shelf and pawed at the book, revealing the hidden scroll. As he rolled it out, he knew he had discovered a treasure worth protecting at all costs.